Up next in the broadcast, another session of the National Assembly begins with the looming backlog of bills that's been caused by the political deadlock on the ferry disaster-related legislation. The White House says it has not changed its policy on North Korea, but reports of secret talks between U.S. and North Korean officials have many wondering whether a formal dialogue may be on its way. Russian President Vladimir Putin, for the first time, calls for new statehood in eastern and southern Ukraine, prompting a debate among U.S. leaders to arm Kiev against what it calls an invasion by Moscow. Primetime News begins now. It's a brand new start to the week. Welcome to Primetime News from Seoul. I'm Sean Lim.
And I'm Kang Chery. Thanks for joining us tonight. Korea's National Assembly opened a regular parliamentary session on this Monday with a dark cloud hanging overhead.
They have a long list of bills to pass, including an all-important budget review, but the rival parties can't get out of first gear until they first pass a much-contested bill on April's ferry tragedy. Our National Assembly correspondent Ji Myung-kil reports.
Some 300 lawmakers gathered Monday to open their regular parliamentary session and first plenary session. The Assembly Speaker used the opportunity to urge lawmakers to regain the people's trust and carry out their legislative duties.
We must put an end to the Sewol-ho ferry bill standstill. The rival parties should yield more and seek understanding. We must focus on reviving the economy to improve the livelihoods of the people and on improving relations between South and North Korea.
Over the next 100 days, the National Assembly is tasked with passing next year's spending budget and a set of economic stimulus and anti-corruption bills, as well as conducting the annual parliamentary audit on the government.
The regular parliamentary session must meet the needs of the people. We must work on next year's budget plans and pass bills related to improving the livelihoods of the people.
But before that can happen, the rival parties will have to resolve a month-long deadlock over a bill designed to uncover the causes of April's ferry accident. Extraordinary sessions were held in July and August, but not a single bill was passed amid the bipartisan wrangling.
The plenary party and the victims' families must reach a compromise over the Sewol-ho ferry bill. The New Politics Alliance for Democracy has been persistent in its efforts to enact it.
In attempts to break the impasse, Plenary Party floor leader Lee Won-gu held third round of talks with the victims' families on Monday, but they failed to reach an agreement. The bereaved families are not backing down from their demand that the committee in charge of the probe have the right to investigate and indict those found responsible for April's ferry tragedy. But the ruling Plenary Party is steadfast in its concerns that doing so could disturb the judicial system and the division of powers. Ji Myung-kil, Arirang News.
Now on to the latest from North Korea. The regime reinforced this notion this morning that it will not hesitate to carry out provocations without notice. Pyongyang fired off another short-range projectile into the East Sea earlier on this Monday. An official at South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff says it had a range of around 220 kilometers and that no prior warning was given. The official adds that it marks the first time the regime has fired a short-range projectile from its northwestern province of Chagangdo, just 60 kilometers from its border with China. Recent South Korean media reports of a U.S. official making a trip to Pyongyang have many wondering if Washington has changed its North Korea policy. The White House says no, but could there be subtle signs of a slight shift? Choi Yoo-sun tells us more.
Washington is sticking with its policy of not engaging with North Korea just for the sake of holding talks. In a written statement to South Korea's Yonhap News, National Security Council spokesperson Patrick Van Trell said the U.S. is open to dialogue with the North, but will decide on re-engaging with the regime based on its actions and not words. By actions, the spokesperson said Pyongyang would need to show it's sincere about ending its nuclear weapons development and that it's ready to fulfill past commitments. Unconfirmed reports of an informal meeting between U.S. and North Korean officials in Pyongyang and the North Korean foreign minister's attendance at the UN General Assembly later this month have fueled speculation of renewed dialogue between the two sides. There's something to make out of Washington's statement, especially as it comes after its informal civilian meeting with North Koreans in May. The Obama administration may have decided to maintain its North Korea policy following that contact. On the other hand, the NSC spokesperson urging the North to use a New York-based channel instead of civilian routes to communicate with the U.S. deserves some attention. Washington's soon-to-be-appointed six-party talks envoy Sidney Seiler, the post in charge of the New York channel, could seek to better utilize it. The Obama administration can certainly make use of that channel to control North Korea's provocative behavior ahead of midterm elections in November. And the three Americans detained in the North, widely speculated to have been the purpose of the reported trip to Pyongyang by an American official, could force the U.S. to seek negotiations. 최유선, Arirang News.
Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women has long been a source of tension between the two neighboring countries, and a Japanese professor says public sentiment on the issue has plunged in Japan following Seoul's rejection of Tokyo's efforts to make amends. Hwang Sung-hee has the story.
Japan has done its best to resolve the issue of its wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women, and the Japanese public will not allow for fresh apologies or a higher degree of compensation than was already given. That's the grim outlook put forward by Yasuaki Onuma, a professor of international law at Meiji University and the former director of the Asian Women's Fund. Set up by the Japanese government in 1995, the fund collected private donations and sent compensation to 364 former comfort women in Taiwan, the Philippines, the Netherlands, and Korea, each of whom received roughly $30,000. The government also provided direct funding for medical care for the recipients and issued hand-signed letters of apology from then Prime Minister Tomichi Murayama. In a recent interview with a group of Korean reporters in Tokyo, Onuma said hardline Korean civic groups were largely responsible for the current impasse. He said the Korean Council for the Women drafted for military sexual slavery by Japan harshly criticized the 7 Korean comfort women who decided to accept the money, saying they were once again selling themselves to Japan by taking Japanese cash. Onuma ruled out a revival of the Asian Women's Fund, pointing to the icy public sentiment in Japan. He said many Japanese people feel the country put its greatest efforts into resolving the comfort women issue and was rejected by Korea, adding that similar actions will not be allowed amid the current nationalistic tide in Japan. The Japanese professor said the individual happiness of the comfort women must be prioritized and that the issue should not become entangled in the diplomatic feud between Korea and Japan. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
There's lots of talk about going eco-friendly and carbon-free nowadays, and the EV market is definitely one of the most eyed markets in the process of going green. What's stopping many of us from driving off in one is price, and so costs need to be cut somewhere. Our Hwang Jie has this week's Industry Insight.
Electric cars are still too pricey compared to their counterparts relying on combustion engines that few want to buy one. The key to slashing the price and luring more consumers to this emission-free auto market is cutting the costs of the battery, which accounts for 40% of the car's total price. So could the electric car era hit anytime soon? Take a look.
By 2020, more than 10 million eco-friendly vehicles powered by batteries are expected to be on the roads.
And this industry of tomorrow is taking root here in Korea with a couple of local companies spearheading the global electric car battery market.
Korean makers LG Chem and Samsung SDI are expected to make up half the electric car battery market share this year. LG Chem recently won a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars from Audi, raising the number of its global customers to 20. They include General Motors, Ford, Renault, and Hyundai. Samsung SDI supplies batteries to BMW. Japan was the pioneer for electric car batteries, but experts say Korean firms are better positioned at this point.
The competitive edge of local battery makers has strengthened since developing batteries for mobile phones and other home appliances. Based on that, they're now building up their technology for batteries in electric and hybrid vehicles.
Battery life is not necessarily the main stumbling block anymore. Companies already have the technology to develop a battery that can run around 320 kilometers on a single charge, more than enough for a normal daily drive for most commuters. But the key in building a big enough electric car market is driving down the price. So the name of the game is to secure a system of mass production, and little wonder battery makers are vying to strike deals with as many automakers as possible as their customers.
The electric car market is still in its early stages, so once battery makers establish business relationships with automakers, it's likely to continue for decades. It's important to secure deals, although they might face losses for now.
The race to win more customers is heating up. The biggest competitor, Panasonic, has teamed up with American electric car maker Tesla to build a massive battery factory in the U.S. It's a big leap by the Japanese battery maker, and the fierce rivalry should ensure the era of electric cars will come sooner than we ever thought possible. Hwang Ji, Arirang News.
Samsung Group's shipbuilding and engineering units have announced they will merge before the year's end as the nation's top conglomerate speeds up its restructuring drive. Samsung Heavy Industries and Samsung Engineering say they will proceed with the merger with a stock ratio of 2.36 Samsung Heavy Industries shares per one Samsung Engineering share. Both units say this will provide a synergy effect in designing, purchasing, and managing onshore as well as offshore plants. The company hopes the merger, set to be completed by December 1st, will boost their revenue by 60% from last year to a combined $40 billion by the year 2020. A majority of listed companies in Korea turned in poor performances in the first half, both in terms of sales and profits. Numbers compiled by the Korea Exchange show the sales of nearly 500 listed firms edging down 0.1% on year in the first half to $894 billion, with their operating profits also down nearly 12%. The exchange operator partly attributes the disappointing figures to lower than expected sales of Samsung Electronics' Galaxy S5 smartphone model. Samsung logged slightly more than $100 billion in revenue in the first half, which is down 4% from last year, while its net profit shed 7% on year. The operating income of the tech giant accounts for about 1/3 of the benchmark Kospi's total capitalization.
Achieving gender equality in any country is a tall task, but perhaps an even taller one in Asia, where cultural norms can make change difficult. To address the gender gap in this region, a 4-day forum began this Monday in Seoul with more than 24 high-profile women taking part. Our Shin Se-min was there for this report.
25 women from 17 countries who are prominent in their fields have gathered in Seoul for the Asia Women Leaders Program, where the priority will be on addressing gender gaps mainly in the Asia-Pacific region. Astrid Tuminas, who is regional director for Microsoft, opened the forum with a keynote address. In it, she said that having more educated women doesn't necessarily translate into more women leaders, particularly in Asia, because of cultural factors. She called on companies and corporations to take the initiative and invest in women as a resource.
Corporations should make the time and space and give the resources because they can't afford not to. Why can't corporations afford not to? First, there is a shortage of human talent, a shortage of human capital. And as the labor force shrinks, you are going to have to draw your talent from the women.
According to a recent report by the Korean Women's Development Institute, which is hosting the forum, Korea's lagging female economic participation rate over the past 13 years has amounted to $192 billion in social costs. And while Korea has invested in trying to narrow the gender gap in the workplace, one of the forum's participants says instituting change goes beyond a set of policies.
Government funds and support systems should not just be announced. They must be implemented and permeate a company's culture. Companies should not just follow these policies. They must also consider the distinctive characteristics of women. An understanding and thoughtful culture should be implemented.
The chairman of Industrial Bank of Korea says guaranteeing a balanced work life for women will eventually become a great asset that will increase the nation's competitiveness globally. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has called for statehood talks on battle-hit regions in southeast Ukraine just a day after the EU gave Russia a week to de-escalate the situation in Kiev or face further sanctions.
With more, we turn to Sun Jung-in at the News Center. Jung-in, what has been the international reaction towards Putin's latest remarks?
Well, Western leaders have accused Moscow of fanning the flames of the insurgency in the east of the country, with U.S. senators calling on White House to provide weapons to Kiev to help its fight against pro-Russian rebels. Our Connie Kim reports with more.
There are increased calls among U.S. politicians to begin arming Ukraine in its fight against what they're calling a Russian invasion. Robert Menendez, the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, said Russian President Vladimir Putin must pay for his, quote, aggression. Speaking to CNN, the Democrats said Washington should provide Ukrainians with weapons to defend themselves. Senator John McCain echoed the sentiment and said Putin is trying to restore the Russian Empire. He called for stronger sanctions on Moscow. The comments out of the U.S. came after Putin called for the statehood of eastern and southern Ukraine.
Substantive, meaningful talks concerning not only technical issues but also related to the issues of the society's political organization and statehood in southeastern Ukraine should begin immediately in order to protect legitimate interests of people living there.
President Putin added that Russia as a state could not stand by and do nothing while its people were being shot at by Ukrainian forces. Russia had previously called for federalization that would give greater rights to eastern Ukraine, but this is the first time Putin has called for statehood. Putin's spokesman later insisted that the statement did not amount to an endorsement of the separatist rebels and that only Kiev can reach an agreement with them. Pro-Russian separatists have been gaining ground on Ukrainian forces in eastern and southern Ukraine. The conflict erupted in April following Russia's annexation of Crimea the previous month. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, over in Hong Kong, thousands of protesters took to the streets last night after the Chinese Communist Party ruled out open nominations for elections in 2017 that will decide Hong Kong's next chief executive. Pro-democracy activists strongly opposed to the move continued to clash with police on Monday as protests orchestrated by members of a movement called Occupy Central vowed to fight for full democracy. Our Park Ji-won reports.
Some 5,000 citizens have taken to the streets of Hong Kong's financial hub, calling for full democracy in the election for its next leader in 2017.
Some officials, who we don't even know how they got chosen in the first place, are telling us Hong Kong people, this place is Beijing's turf. Today I have to tell you this is definitely not true. Hong Kong is Hong Kong people's own turf.
The latest Occupy Central protests, as they are called, were sparked by a ruling out of China's parliament that will allow just 2 to 3 candidates to run for chief executive of Hong Kong in 2017. All of the candidates will first need to gain majority backing from a nominating committee, meaning it will be almost impossible for opposition politicians to even register as candidates.
We have to voice out that we don't agree with the Chinese government's decision. We want democracy. We want a fair system to protect the environment of Hong Kong.
Despite the protests, current Hong Kong chief executive is defending Beijing's decision, saying it is a milestone of democratic reform.
Universal suffrage for the CE election through one person, one vote by Hong Kong people is not only a big step forward for Hong Kong, but also a historic milestone.
The Occupy Central protesters see it another way and have promised mass protests against the decision out of Beijing in the weeks and months to come. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
And finally, as speculations continue to run high over the possible unveiling of iPhone 6 at Apple's media event next Tuesday, reports are now turning over the American tech giant making headway on its plans to turn its best-selling gadget into a mobile wallet. Bloomberg, citing unnamed sources, has reported on Monday that Apple is in talks with Visa, MasterCard, and American Express to partner in its mobile payment system. It would conceptually allow users to pay with their phone at the cash register using NFC technology and the phone's fingerprint recognition reader. If true, Apple would still need to convince U.S. retailers to adopt the technology, where it enjoys the largest market share. And that wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow evening.
Hello and welcome to sports. Getting started in the major leagues. The LA Dodgers' Ryu Hyun-jin made his first start after injury against the San Diego Padres, and it looked as though he didn't miss a beat. It was his first time on the mound in 18 days. The last time out, he left the game early with a tweaked right gluteus. The lefty looked sharp against the Padres, giving up 4 hits over 7 innings with 7 strikeouts and no walks, as the Dodgers won easily 7-1 to maintain their grip in the NL West. Now with the win, he matched his career best 14 wins from his rookie season last year. And moving on to LPGA golf, the Portland Classic wrapped up over the weekend with Austin Ernst edging out Ji Myung-kil for the title. They were tied at 14 under at the end of regulation, sending it to a playoff. There, on the 18th hole, Kim failed to sink a putt for par, giving Ernst her first LPGA victory. Kim said she was happy with second, but has to be seething about losing her 5th playoff. She has yet to win one. Meanwhile, 2 golfers who are part of the first generation of Koreans in the LPGA, Chang Jung and Han Hee-won, retired from the game after playing one last time in Portland. And over in Spain for the FIBA World Cup, South Korea's chances at the tournament took a huge blow as they lost their first 2 matches over the weekend. They first fell to Angola 69-80 on Saturday, and this was before a blowout loss to Australia 55-89 the next day. They face a must-win situation against Slovenia and need to ramp up their offense, which is worst of all teams in competition. They meet at 7 p.m. on Tuesday local time. That's 3 a.m. Wednesday in Korea. And finally, let's get to the U.S. Open going on in New York City. 4th round action kicked off for the ladies, while the men finished up with round 3. Now first to the ladies' match of the day, 10th-ranked Caroline Wozniacki wore down 5th-ranked Maria Sharapova in 3 sets to reach her first Grand Slam quarterfinal since the Australian Open in 2012. Meanwhile, for the men, Roger Federer cruised to victory in 4 sets, while Gaël Monfils took down fellow French national Richard Gasquet in straight sets. Well, that's all I have for now. This has been Stephen Che. Your weather update is up next.
Hope your week is off to a good start. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your weather updates. At the moment, some areas in the central regions, including Seoul, are getting showers, and 5 to 20 millimeters is forecast through later tonight. Well, autumn rains are expected to fall nationwide tomorrow. The system will begin in Jeju and it moves northward, with some parts also getting thunder and lightning. And also down south and in Jeju, pre-heavy rainfall advisories have already been issued. So on Tuesday, we're looking at anywhere from 50 to 100 millimeters of precipitation nationwide, and this is about 5 times the amount that's forecast to drop overnight. As for the week's outlook, the rain should stick around through Thursday, but the rest of the week looks to be nice and sunny. Taking a closer look at tomorrow's readings, Seoul reaches 27 while cities down south hit 26. Let's move on to other places. Daejeon and Jeju make it to 26, Dokdo and Mount Kumgang to 23. That does it for me for this hour, but tune in for more updates after midnight.
Thanks, Bo-kyung. And that's Primetime News for this Monday. I am Kang Chery. Thanks for watching.
And I'm Sean Lim. Have a great evening. We'll see you soon.